Oi, 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 YouTube. It's good to see you. Welcome to another video. I hope you have your water. I hope you've been taking care of yourself and unclench that jaw. Today, we're going to be talking about a tier list. We're going to be making our own tier list for killers in Dead by Daylight, but the tier list is going to be about the amount of skill required to play these killers. Now, that being said, that's not to say that any of these killers are particularly like super GG easy mode or anything like that. I think every killer at a high level will take some amount of skill regarding mind gaming, loops, 3-genning, and things of that nature so that you can get the best of like really good teams and really good players. So all of that being said, I think all of them take a base amount of skill, but I'm mostly talking about their abilities and leveraging their abilities at a high level. So we're going to go ahead and dive in and just kind of take these sort of sequentially or however they're appearing here. And we might make some adjustments here and there. So this might be a little bit controversial, but I think Hillbilly is one of the hardest killers to play in DBD. Obviously, before Hillbilly got the overheat mechanic added, he was played a lot more. And a lot of people would say Hillbilly is actually easy if you play at a low level. But the big thing about Hillbilly is curving the chainsaws, right? Getting the chainsaw curves and really optimizing on the high part of the skill ceiling that he has, right? Because I think if you're just using the chainsaw to get cross maps or to just move, I think he seems very easy, right? And then you M1. But if you're actually using the chainsaw to curve around an object and down people regularly, I think that takes a high level of skill. And Hillbilly, unfortunately, gets punished a lot because if he bumps into something, then he takes a heavy animation. So to really master that and get excellent, I think takes a really high level of skill. I would say that he is one of the hardest killers in Dead by Daylight to play, if not the hardest at an incredibly high level of play. So that being said, that's where I'm going to put Hillbilly. I think Blight is going to be... I think I'm going to put him... I think I'll put him at the low end of the S tier as well. Now, hear me out. A lot of people, in a lot of ways, Blight is mechanically a little easier than Billy in terms of like the height of the ceiling, I think, when it comes to using the ability, right? With Hillbilly, you have to know the exact timing, when you can curve, where the obstacle is, and things like that. But with Blight, I think the skill actually comes in being able to chart your trajectory and path ahead of time, right? To see a killer or to see a survivor go in an area and be able to go, I'm going to bounce here, 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 and hopefully like cut them off, right? And do things like that, right? If you're on an LT wall, being able to curve that LT wall, bounce off one of the walls and then curve in, being able to make some crazy Blight plays requires above average map knowledge, competency with your ability, and I think it takes like Blight at a high level is insane. Now this does not include like J flicking, because J flicking it to me, and the developers have said it's an exploit, exploiting the DPI bug within the game. So I'm not really talking about J flicking when I'm talking about any of that stuff. I don't care if you J flick. I will be glad to see it go, but I'm mostly talking about being able to chart your own course, your own path. Pretty standard Blight gameplay, but at a high level. All right. So that's where I think the Blight really kind of stands. So next up, we got Leatherface. I think Leatherface is kind of, I want to put him, we might readjust this depending on where other people go, but I think Bubba is going to be like C tier, right? Bubba's at worst, he's an M1 killer. At best, once you've broken up a bunch of pallets, you chainsaw people, right? The biggest issue with Bubba is like windows, right? Shack window, shack loops. When you get really smart survivors around shack and like the shack window, LT walls, things like that, in some cases you will just have to M1. And there is some skill in knowing like, okay, I just got to M1 right now. There is some skill in being able to body block a window to get that chainsaw and things like that, or knowing, you know, how far away you can be to start your chainsaw and using your tokens at the precise moment that they need to be used. Actually, as I'm explaining it, I might bump him up. They made him a little bit more skill-based. Previously, he never used to have tokens. I think being able to methodically use the tokens and use them at the last second to really extend your ability is important for him. But I think that he's at the low end of the B tier to me, because for the most part, he's pretty straightforward. You know, don't get too greedy and you're going to do great. All right. We got Clown. I think Clown was made to be a little bit stronger than he used to be. But I think he might be C tier, right? Obviously, there's a lot of stuff you can do with Clown, right? To slow them down and then, you know, or throw a speed up yellow bottle where they are, throw a slowdown where you are and rotate around the loop and, you know, catch them while they're slowed down and you're boosted and stuff like that. I think that's really interesting. But at the end of the day, like, he still lacks a little bit of something, right? The reload's better. He's a little bit stronger than he used to be, but you're never going to really see him in like top tier tournaments or anything like that. He's playable, but he has a lot of deficits, far fewer than Leatherface. He still has to M1 people twice, even though he can slow them down, right? There are ways to use the bottle that is incredibly intelligent. Hitting a tree really high so that there's a bigger spread on the bottles and things like that is great. But at the end of the day, he's still kind of mostly M1 killer that you just try to slow people down to get that M1 a little faster. So put him around C tier. We got the Deathslinger. Honestly, I struggle with this a little bit. Deathslinger, I almost want to put him a little higher. I might get some heat for this. Deathslinger, at the end of the day, you have to know how fast his projectile shoots and about how far out from his terror radius he can shoot, you know, like what that distance looks like as a killer. You know, I think that he has a short terror radius. With Monitor and Abuse, he becomes a lot easier to just sneak up on survivors at a mid-level of gameplay and even into some red rank matches. I think a killer that can optimize their time, M1 first, shoot, reel in, or, you know, get somebody to run across the window real quick and then shoot and reel them in, hit them through the window. I think that knowledge is important. And I think obviously being able to time that shot, knowing the timing on that shot is all very important. But at the end of the day, the range is short enough that if you don't get greedy as Deathslinger, then you still could do pretty okay. So I think he's at the higher end of B, but I don't know that I want to put him in A tier per se. So we'll see. I might flex that a little bit later. So we'll kind of see what happens there. But we have Demogorgon up next, B tier for sure in terms of like skill. Knowing when to use his shred is super important, and knowing how you can sort of the car techs really aren't in the game the way they used to be, but when you can sort of knowing when you can bounce around an obstacle to get a shred, knowing when you can shred at max range versus the minimum amount of range to shred, faking shreds at pallets, being able to really use your ability to push survivors is great. You know, getting a shred at the shack when they're going through the window, all of that stuff is awesome. But at the end of the day, you know, in portal placement and stuff like that, being able to set up that web of portals and things, it's all great and dandy. Again, Demo, I think, is at the low end of the B tier. He's kind of like a Huntress with less range, and he moves his whole body. So I think there's a lot of knowing distances, knowing how fast survivors are moving, peeking around a corner and getting that last second shred, you know, holding your shred so that survivors fishtail and then, you know, you fire right as they fishtail into it. Stuff like that takes a good amount of skill and knowledge, but at the end of the day, it's not at the same as like Blight or Billy or even some of the other killers we're going to talk about. So Freddy. I think Freddy to me is D tier when it comes to skill. Freddy was one of those killers that before the patch, before the nerf they're giving him, Freddy was one of those killers where you could just find somebody, M1 them, and if you didn't want to break a pallet, you could place 8 snares around that pallet, eventually just catch somebody, right? Like he's a killer where he doesn't take any slowdown for placing snares. He could place them over and over and over and over and just become oppressive. And then when he does hook that person, he just warps. He uses barbecue to warp and pop a gen or something like that, right? I think, you know, Freddy feels overwhelming for newer survivors because they're always going to wake up. They're always going to alarm clocks across the map. They don't really realize that they don't necessarily need to do that. And so they don't get on their gen. They don't stay on their gen. They just go wake up. They go to unhook. Like they stay off gens a lot just because of Freddy's passive. Not to mention once they fall asleep again, all of the slowdown, the teleporting, popping gens, things, all that. I think Freddy doesn't really take any skill to pick up and play. Like, you have to know his abilities to some extent, and at a high level, you have to know how to loop. But being able to place snares down and slow people down and then teleport around and stuff like that. At the end of the day, Freddy, he kind of plays himself to some degree. So I think that there's no offense to any people that play Freddy, but a lot of people that I know in my community got very good at the game. They got to purple ranks playing Freddy. They switched off to Huntress or Legion or GhostFace or whatever, and they plummeted in rank because they didn't actually know a lot of the stuff that they maybe should know. Because of all of the tools that Freddy gives you, other killers just were way harder for people to play. So Freddy to me doesn't take skill. I don't play him on stream because I find him extremely boring. It's pretty easy to win most of your matches as Freddy, I think. So my opinion. We have Doc. I'm going to put Doc as a C tier. Ooh. Maybe a B tier. We'll kind of see. I'm not sure. Doc, we've seen a few tournament Docs. I think Doc at a low level, right? People don't know what the shock does. They don't know that it prevents pallet throws, flashlights, dead hards, things like that. So you see a lot of lower level killer players that aren't sure what to do. He does have some versatility in his kit. For instance, I never run any sort of tracking perks. I don't run any sort of aura reading or anything like that, or discordance or whispers on Doc, because I just use static blast. I have a generally good intuition for where survivors are. So after I down somebody and hook them, I'll static blast where I think the survivors are and continue chase. So his ability is pretty strong. And being able to use static blast to prevent, or being able to use shock therapy to prevent people dropping pallets and stuff is great. I think there's a skill in knowing the timing for the shock therapy, and there is definitely a skill in knowing when to use static blast and things of that nature. But at the end of the day, Doc, at a low level, kind of plays himself. At a high level, he becomes very oppressive with the amount of times you have to get out of tier 3 madness, the way tier 3 madness affects skill checks, illusory docs popping up so that you kind of know where people are all of the time. In a lot of ways, I actually almost want to put him a little bit lower, because I feel like in a lot of ways, yes, Doc does take some very tight decision making and some good mind games, but I feel like he's got so much in his kit to track people and to overwhelm people in the middling ranks and even into some purple ranks. When I play Doc, I play Lullaby Undying Doc with distressing, you know what I mean? You can get real goofy with this build and still do pretty okay at a high level. There's not a lot of punishment for missing some of that stuff too much. You break the pallet and move on. So I don't know. I think Doc isn't super skillful. I see the timing and getting the shocks out and things like that. But the rest of it, like I said, static blast, you can kind of do so many different things with it. Plays itself a bit. GhostFace. GhostFace in terms of skill to play and to play him well is, I'm gonna say it's pretty up there. And the reason I think that, it's tough. Here's the thing. I'm going to put him at C for now. The reason I think this is because at a low level, GhostFace kind of wins a lot because people aren't paying attention. He gets the easy stocks. People group up, things of that nature, right? At a lower sort of tier of gameplay. At high level, it's easier for GhostFace to get slapped because after he marks or exposes somebody, they're paying enough attention that they leave really, really quickly. They early run, they throw pallets early. They don't risk anything, which means most of the time the mark kind of gets wasted. He's still an M1 killer, right? He's very limited in his ability. So I think the biggest skill ceiling for GhostFace is 99ing the stock and coming back to it later and doing sort of those smarter moves. But at the end of the day, I think that's the highest part of his skill ceiling. I don't think it gets a whole lot higher than that, right? Yeah, I think I feel good about putting him kind of C tier in terms of skill. I definitely like him. I don't say, this is not a reflection of who I like, but I think C tier is kind of where I want to put him. Hag in terms of skill, I definitely going to put an A. The reason I don't put her at S is because mechanically she's not difficult. But you have to have a really good working knowledge of how survivors run and move and how they function and play the game, right? Trapping at a high level, trapping hooks isn't going to be enough. You have to be able to trap pathways and trap places that are going to push survivors where you want them to go. And you can't place your traps too close because multiple traps will get popped at once. And there's a lot to think about. And we kind of see this when we see like Ots Darva play Hag against, tournament survivors and things of that nature, how crazy it can kind of be. A lot of people at a lower level play think she's very boring to play against and things of that nature. And I can see that because she does get labeled as like the camping killer because she just teleports right back to hook. There is counterplay to her traps. And so you have to kind of plan for that and account for that. And knowing how to sneakily lay traps in areas that are going to, because there's a radius around it that are going to pop but not be seen and things like that. I think there's a lot that goes into planning for Hag. And I think anytime you have to plan a lot as a killer, automatically you get bumped up there a ton. I mean, like most killers should worry about 3 gens, where those generators are, what pallets to bust up, who's been hooked multiple times, whatever, all that stuff, right? But with Hag, you have to constantly, what traps are where am I pushing them, where are they going, if they're doing this, I think it's a very complicated killer to play at an extraordinarily high level. She obviously, like I said, she gets a bad rap at a low level because she gets played that way in a low level, just like Bubba camps at a low level, right? So next we come across the Huntress. Huntress is one of my favorite killers to play. I think she has an A tier skill gap. I mean, wasting hatchets can be super detrimental, and aim is obviously a skill-based thing. But also patience is a thing that you kind of get forged into doing with Huntress. At a high rank, when you see a survivor in front of you just spinning, and you can't just like unload every hatchet you have on them, knowing to like step back, get the flick hit if you do flick, being able to be patient, wait for them to fishtail into it, or at an extraordinary high level when you have Barbecue and Chili, Bitter Murmur, and you can get cross maps consistently and in insane places and ways. The skill ceiling, I almost want to put her at an S tier. The skill ceiling is nuts on Huntress, but it is situational because if you get Haddonfield or Coal Tower, any of these that have like this large, huge center building that could be like very obscuring, it gets very difficult. So, but even when it's close to the chest, missing a bunch of hatchets could be detrimental to Huntress. So there's a lot of skill, I think, in doing all of that. So I'm going to put her at A. Legion. In terms of skill to play, I want to put Legion low. And again, this isn't me like, I'm not saying Legion's like stupid easy or anything like that. The reason I put Legion at D is because like you have to know when to use your ability again, right? If you're constantly using Feral Frenzy when you could be just downing somebody, if they're wounded and you use Frenzy, right? Like if you're overusing it, right? That's a problem for sure. But at the end of the day, it's the base amount of knowledge will do just fine. Legion has mending built in, which if you go through and stab, 3 people are mending. That's 3 people that aren't on gens. And then you down someone, hook them. And Legion falls apart if people spread out, of course, but we're not talking necessarily about strength. We're talking about like the ease of use on the ability. And for the most part, Legion is stab. Where are the next people? Nobody. Cancel ability. Autopilot. So Legion's not really technically super difficult to use. The ceiling's not super high. Again, I'm not saying that Legion's a bad killer or that they're easy mode. I am saying that at a high level, there are far fewer decisions that need to be made, per second or whatever. So we're going to put Myers at a C tier. In terms of skill, knowing how long you should stay in tier 1, tier 2, when to pop tier 3, 99ing your tier 3, all of that stuff is really important for Michael Myers. But that's kind of it. After that, you have an M1 killer who's augmented by their perks. So, you want to get out of tier 1 really fast. You want to know how long you want to stay in tier 2. You want to do a lot of damage in tier 2, maybe use tier 3 when there's sort of a 4 or 3 gen going on. So everybody's kind of grouped up or something like that. Knowing when to slug and be able to snowball, all of that's awesome and important. So there is, a cut above in sort of using that ability. But for the most part, it's not, it is what it is. It is face value. That's the ability. So that's where I'm going to put Myers. I don't know that I need to explain too much more. We have Nurse. Nurse goes S tier, but I think Nurse is above Blight, but below Billy. Nurse, obviously, you have to get a feel for the blinks. And this may be a little controversial. I think Nurse is easier to learn than Billy. because you go through stuff, right? And you'll learn that, like, if you're on Gideon, you'll go down accidentally a lot, or you'll go into the basement. And learning the muscle memory for how long holding it actually moves you and things like that is super important and very difficult. And you do take a lot of fatigue for that. But once you start getting decent at it, to me, it's very, very like, the ball keeps rolling, I guess, is kind of what I'm saying. With Billy, I think the big problem is, like, while you're learning it, you bump into stuff, or people early throw pallets, so you can't use your chainsaw to curve. His ability is so not only situational, but also subject to being messed up, that it's like, people may not even ever see his ceiling. I think with Nurse, people see that ceiling immediately and they go like, oh my God. And so I think that makes her not like less hard to use, but I think the skill required to use her at a high level is a lot harder than Billy. Again, she moves across the map pretty fast. She goes through objects, right? Billy is still subject to pallets and windows and things of that nature. And getting greedy with his ability and with his curving, I think that's why I want to put him above Nurse. Nurse gets to circumvent a lot of game mechanics, and that kind of makes up for the fact that she has a really difficult ability. Billy has to play by the rules and also has a very nuanced, weird ability. So it might be controversial. I don't know what you guys think, but let me know down below. We have Oni. I think when it comes to skill, I think Oni is a B. Unlike Billy, Oni, when he's in his ability, gets to fuck up and like kind of keep just getting into it. No overheat or anything like that, but he gets a little bit more controllability than Billy does, right? I think Oni does take some amount of skill for sure. Getting the 40% ability charge on hit and being able to get the like 90-degree flicks on people and knowing how to run things wide and how to run certain tiles. But I don't know that he's at like an A or an S tier. I think he's really high B tier because his ability is pretty situational. And because once you down one person, with a lot of people run Infectious Fright or something like that, you snowball really fast. Blight doesn't get that capability to just like snowball off people really quick. And Blight's not stuck. Like I said, Billy kind of can curve and then go in a straight line, but like Oni's not stuck in that. He can kind of do and go in multiple different directions, or like pause and then go the other way and still get the one hit down. So I might put him at low A. What do you guys think about that? I'm not sure. I'll think on that, because Oni definitely has a lot of issues. He bonks into things a ton. You have to know how to not do that. You have to know how people might run again. There's a lot of nuance to Oni, so maybe A is a good spot. We got the Piggy. Piggy's gonna go to B. I'm gonna say situationally here. The reason here, Pig is strong, undeniably, really strong killer. There's almost no other killer besides like maybe Legion that has like built-in slowdown as a power, right? Like you have to go get traps off, so you don't get to do any gens, right? But that like the traps don't take any skill. It's actually RNG, which really falls apart for her. The Pig Dash though, and how to use the Pig Dash, and we've seen it on like Disturbed Ward, Crotus Pren Asylum, right? When you Pig Dash out one window and into the other, and some really goofy things like that. There are some really crazy interactions you can have with Pig, especially at pallets, right? So you can crouch at a pallet if it's a short loop, and you can fake the dash one way, the other way, and then go around and get somebody. If somebody is a smart survivor and they start to just make distance from that short loop, then you fake the crouch and you get up. So there is some like great next level knowledge for how to fake her ability, how to do certain things with the dash, and even knowing when to use the sneak and things like that. I think that is all awesome. I actually don't know that I put her necessarily above Demo, maybe just because she has a little bit more mobility and learning how to use that, but I don't put her any higher than B. I think B is being kind of generous. I think we're going to put Plague at, I almost want to put Plague at like an A tier, and she's low A tier, but I'll tell you why. She's not necessarily mechanically difficult to control. Knowing how the vomit works, knowing that within the vomit strand you see are little dots, and knowing how that functions, and knowing the projectile speed, and vomiting in front of the survivor, so by the time it gets there, it lands on them. knowing there's so much, it's not mechanical skill, but there's so much pre-planning. The minute you spawn and the minute you see somebody, you go, do I vomit on them till they're broken? Do I vomit a little bit, find other people, vomit on them, and then commit to a chase, right? And then even then it's like, are they cleansing a ton? It's almost like this crazy augmented game of cat and mouse, because I mean, DBD is already cat and mouse, but now you're like, are they cleansing a ton? No. Okay, then I can M1 them. Okay, they're cleansing a ton. Let me go drink so we can make these really fast downs. And you have to make these like micro decisions with Plague at an insane level. I almost want to put her kind of in the A tier or S tier to actually use at a high level. Obviously, she has a lot of deficits in her strength and things like that. Again, this is not necessarily about strength, but that you have to think and consider all of this stuff when you are playing as Plague. I think we'll put her high A tier. There's going to be a lot of like A tier skill killers, I think. So she's awesome. She's very difficult to play. So yeah. We're going to go with Pyramid Head. Ooh. He's my main, and he's really near and dear to my heart. I almost want to put him at S, but I think I'll put him at A because I don't think he's quite up there with Blight, Nurse, Billy. I don't think so, but I think he's really high up there. And the reason a lot of people want to say like Pyramid Head's very boring. You just shoot at a window, you shoot at a pallet, you know, reap benefits. But I think with Pyramid Head, we see it a lot, and we don't see a ton of Pyramid Head players really, in my opinion. I don't. Because I don't think people take risks with his ability, right? When I'm, dragging my blade through the ground and I get a shot through a wall, right? When I predict where the survivor is and I can't even see them and I get that hit, and I do that fairly consistently, that's what makes him strong. That's what allows you to end chases so fast, is if they're in a jungle gym, being able to cut them off. If they're at the shack, being able to down them through the wall, and being able to predict in your like mind's eye of like, okay, they exited the door and they're going this way, and sort of like mentally tracking them so that fires off and hits. But there's also something in knowing that if survivors are, running a certain way and they're doubling back, they're super smart, they're trying to keep you on your toes, just not using your ability at all, pulling it out of the ground and M1ing, or, juking with them. So aiming ahead of them so that they doubling back with them, and then aiming ahead so that they'll move into it. You can kind of induce them to juke and then kind of cut them off in some cases, all kinds of like mind games with how to use his ability, because it is a slow ability with a slow turn radius. The best time to use it is when they can't exactly see where it's going to roll out and they don't have time to react. I think that there is so much with Pyramid Head, knowing when to cage, how, like, okay, I'm caging him here because he's going to go to the side of the map that has my 3-gen. So we're going to go over there and now we have pressure, or I'm not going to cage him yet because I'm going to hook him and control this area. And then when he gets unhooked, I'll cage him. There's so much that goes into like being a very good Pyramid Head. It seems like it would be easy mode autopilot, and some of it is, but at a higher level, it just gets so much more complex. We have Spirit. I'm going to put Spirit at a C tier. The reason I put Spirit at a C tier and not D tier is because I don't think she's as GG easy auto mode as people kind of make her seem. I think at a low level of gameplay, survivors make themselves very obvious. So if a Spirit wounds somebody, they run off, then she phases. They don't really know what that looks like. They may not play killer a lot, so they go down very quickly. At a high level of play, I think that Spirit is very, very strong, but the skill required is maybe not there. You have to have a good headset and you have to have good survivor knowledge at a really high level of play. But like the counterplay in her ability is almost not there, right? Survivors have to sort of hide, early throw pallets, like throw the pallet, double back across it. Spirit can fake her ability and just stand there. I don't think she's OP or anything like that, but these are all things that once you know that you can just stand there and fake it, once you get a decent headset, once you run Strider, for instance, like her ability becomes very easy for her and very difficult for survivors. And primarily most of that is because while she's actually phasing, survivors don't have a lot of counterplay. Nurse, Billy, like with Billy, people hear the chainsaw, they juke, or they early throw pallets. With Nurse, they can try to double back, or they can try to spin, or they can try to break LOS and double back, or break LOS and make distance, or all kinds of things, right? If they know there's a blink coming. But with Spirit, there's no way, the only way to know they're phasing is if you try to blind the husk and it doesn't blind, or if you hear it. There's not a lot of counterplay in it. And in that way, Spirit is very easy for a killer to come up with We had a lot of people again in the community get very good at Spirit and then play other killers and go like, wow, I'm not super great. She moves at 170% movement speed while she's phasing. She's incredibly fast. Even if you don't actually find the survivor, you'll get right clear close to them, or you can move across the map she's got a lot. So she's not skillless. She takes a little bit, but she her abilities just stack against survivors so easily. So we got the Trap Daddy himself. I'm going to put him in A tier. Trapper's really volatile. He's very, Trapper's easy to get to destroy, right? His traps are destroyed very easily. Object of Obsessions destroy Trapper, right? He very much requires 3-genning, setting up that 3-gen, and knowing survivor knowledge, knowing where survivors are going to walk, and putting traps in those areas, right? Making the traps not obvious and obscure, right? Not placing it in the shack doorway, but to the side between the shack and the fast vault window, so that when they're looping it, they step into it. Having all of that planning down, and even some like Giga Brain Trapper traps, placing them off to the side of a gen, or if you're going to pressure them from this direction, they'll step into it, things of that nature. You have to have really good survivor knowledge and really good map knowledge. I think that he takes a lot of knowledge and skill to play at a high level, and to play effectively, right? And to do very well. Again, this is not a discussion of his strength, but primarily like what it takes to play him. Then we got Trickster. I'm putting Trickster at A. As like a Trickster main, I think Trickster is very hard. And again, this is not a discussion of their skill. Or a discussion of their strength, but a discussion of their skill. I think Trickster's really hard to play as, because with Huntress, right, you get the benefit of hitting a hatchet at a window, right, at a long wall jungle gym, at the shack loop, right? If you can get in there, hatchet at the window, boom, and then they leave the loop or something like that. Trickster does not get that advantage. So not only do you have to have an excellent lock on being able to mind game these sort of things, but you also have to hit more than one projectile. Huntress's hitbox is fairly large, and that's no fault of the hitbox, that's no fault of the people that play Huntress. But with Trickster, very small daggers, very easy to miss, especially if you're on console. You have to hit 8 of them. You could unload most of your belt and miss a lot of them if the survivor is squirming, moving back and forth. And the thing is like, if a survivor has 2 knives in them and they throw a pallet, they'll only take 4, maybe 5 more knives. They won't get fully lacerated. So they early throw and they keep running. And so knowing how many knives you can get at what situation, when to drop those knives, when to lacerate somebody and then catch up for the M1, all of that stuff requires like so much planning. Like, I'm at this tile, I can hit 3 knives at the window, then I have to drop it, get back to my 110, keep moving. Knowing how close you have to be, directional pressure is important, right? Come from unexpected directions so that you can get very, very close, get those knives. And like I said, in some cases, if there's a dead zone, you could hit 16 knives before the survivor gets to a tile, but you have to hit those 16 knives. And out of 60, statistically, it seems like that's super easy to do. But when they're squirming and your aim is not quite where it needs to be, it falls apart very quickly. So I think Trickster does require a decent amount of skill. I don't think he is GG easy mode. It's really easy to fool ourselves into thinking that, well, he just gets up and just autopilots a bunch of knives. But we've played against certain Tricksters that I think we've all played against Tricksters that just don't hit their knives, right? So I rest my case a little. Next up, we have the twins. Unfortunately, the twins, I think, are going to fall into like maybe a B or a C tier. I want to say B, and I'll kind of explain why. I think a lot of people, you have to know when to use Victor, how to use Victor, how to not miss your shots, and how to split pressure on people. There's a lot that goes into that, right? If you're missing a lot of hits as Victor, you send Victor out, people are healthy, you miss a shot, they kick you, you send Victor out again. It becomes a spiral. So knowing when to use your ability is super important, and having aim, right? When people are, again, fishtailing, you have to know to like see the signs like, oh, they're going to swing into me, shoot now, land on them, right? Try to cut them off. There's also a pretty decent skill ceiling in getting like hits over the pallet, hits over generators and things like that. But Unfortunately, there is a sort of exploit to the twins, I think, that maybe wasn't fully, I don't think the devs thought it through necessarily entirely, but you can camp with Victor. You place Victor at a hook, and then you hook on that hook, and then he just stands there and proxies it. And that sucks. So I think a lot of twins players end up falling into this GG easy mode of, I'm just going to sort of camp a little bit and protect the hook and not, use Victor in ways that make sense. If there's 3 people wounded, Victor can slug people really well. And that's good. That's not scummy. A lot of killers snowball. Oni, Myers, a lot of people snowball. Almost every killer snowballs if they really need to, right? So that's not the issue. The camping is kind of the GG easy mode that I think a lot of twins players might fall into. There's not a lot of twins players right now, though. So I think there is a lot of skill to twins. I almost want to put them a little higher on this list. I think they definitely require more skill than almost all of these people in the B tier. But she does have something that makes her where people aren't utilizing that skill. So I think a lot of players of the twins are not using the skill. They're just kind of using the cop-out method. So, and then we have the Wraith. I think Wraith is like high. I don't know. The skill to using Wraith is interesting, right? I think there's a skill to sort of body blocking and knowing like, okay, cutting people off of pallets, or I'm going to uncloak in front of this window so they can't vault past me, and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, he's an M1 killer. His ability is fairly cut and dry. You have to be kind of good at, M1ing. And that's why I think he's one of the best killers to start the game as. So you just learn how to chase survivors, right? Easy peasy. I think that he fits that the best. It's not that he's not a good killer. He's one of my favorite killers to play for some reason. I love playing Wraith. I'm glad he's gotten buffs, but he moves very fast when he's cloaked. There is some counterplay to his cloak. He can get light burned and things like that. But after he uncloaks, he's an M1 killer. He has a great lunge. Knowing how to use that lunge is really important. But that's kind of it. There's not really like a high skill to playing as Wraith. So, and I think that's my tier list. There's a lot more people that skew a little higher than I thought, but I feel pretty confident in this. And this is reflected in the killers that I actually choose to play as well. So, yeah, I feel pretty good about that. What do you guys think, though? Those of you that skipped to the end and just looked at the end, I'm looking at you. Well, what do you guys think of this? Let me know down below what you think. You might disagree with me. Remember, we're trying to be kind. This is a kind community. I'm not trying to tear nobody apart for their opinions. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. I'll talk to you soon. Please don't forget to get some water. Unclench your jaw. I'll be praying to the entity to see you in the next video.